Uber and Lyft is now being taken to trial. Things are getting really interesting. As you can see right away, Massachusetts takes Uber and Lyft to trial over whether drivers are employees. Like I've said in numerous videos when it comes to news articles, even if you're not in Massachusetts, this can have and definitely will have a ripple effect around the rest of the country, as this is a big story, potentially one of the biggest stories to ever happen with Uber and Lyft, to see what this result is going to be. And I've already done a video about kind of the small part, but let me pause this random ad. But you can see right here that the Massachusetts Attorney General took Uber and Lyft to trial on Monday over allegations that rideshare companies are misclassifying thousands of drivers in the state as independent contractors to avoid treating them as more costly employees. As you can imagine, if drivers are employees, Uber Lyft has to spend more money out of their own pocket to keep them as employees. Now, I did a video about this previously in terms of this situation before they got taken to trial, and it was found that an auditor, after reviewing everything, demonstrated that Uber and Lyft owes potentially hundreds of millions of dollars as a result of this misclassification. This is a big deal because remember, it is kind of weird, I'm not gonna lie, or I guess pros and cons depending on how you look at it, that in America, we have, of course, federal laws or country laws, but also different laws or rules vary drastically state to state, especially when it comes to ride sharing. And with all these other states looking at Massachusetts, because this is a big story, if this goes well, this could be groundbreaking for every driver, right? And going down here, let's keep going. Basically, the Attorney General is asking a judge to conclude that drivers for Uber and Lyft are employees under state law. Again, this is big. This is groundbreaking because of this. Yeah, let me continue. And therefore, are entitled to benefits such as minimum wage, overtime, and earned sick time. This is huge, I'm telling you, because if this passes, if this works out well in the state's favor, and let's say Uber and Lyft says, oh shoot, you know what? And let's say they lose, and like, all right, you know what? I guess drivers now have to be employees. Now we have to give a minimum wage and overtime and earn sick leave. This can change everything for ride sharing. I think because I've talked about in other videos, of course, we have Prop 22 here in California that happened. Driver stays independent contractors, but now they get, a minimum wage, etc. This also happened in New York, but California and New York are two big states. They're very different, I think, than the rest of the country, just given how big they are in general. But you look at these mini stories that are popping up in Minneapolis. I've covered that 5 or 6 or 7 different times already. What's going on in Massachusetts? The fact that now, the state's going after Uber and Lyft, this is just not a casual, like, oh, we're going to maybe put in a new law. Hopefully Uber and Lyft will like it. No. This is like direct legal stuff going on, right? And as you can see here, and this is, again, the big thing, like I just said earlier, studies have shown that using contractors can cost companies as much as 30% less than employees. So Uber and Lyft, no surprise to any driver out there, are saving money by you being independent contractors. They don't have to worry about, like I said, minimum wage, overtime, earned sick leave, etc. The company's algorithms, pricing policies, and operating standards gave them a level of control over their drivers that belied any claim that they work independently. The drivers are given little time to decide whether to accept a ride from a user, just 15 seconds, and are never told upfront how much riders will be paying them and the companies before letting them in their vehicles. What entrepreneur would do that, right? Again, I've talked about this in a lot of other videos. There's so many pros to being a driver. There are a lot of benefits. I'm not trying to act like there isn't, but there's also a lot of cons. And what's interesting is what I've learned from all the rideshare drivers that I've interviewed on this channel, both in person and online and everything, because again, your location, in case you didn't know, is the number one factor that can determine how much money you can make as a driver. So there's a huge variance and a huge spread and spectrum of what it's like to be a rideshare driver from city to city or state to state. And one thing I've learned, again, of interviewing all these drivers in all these different areas is this. Most drivers love being a rideshare driver, but they hate Uber and Lyft, mainly because of the way Uber and Lyft treats them, right? And this is just a huge, this is a huge representation of what a lot of drivers have to go through, all right? Now, on the other end, Lyft's lawyer states that Lyft works for drivers, not the other way around. I don't know. Uber Council, right, argued that drivers value the flexibility of being able to drive when they want, which is true, allowing them to tailor their work around children, other jobs and appointments, and provide services only part-time. The flexibility is critical for them. These drivers do not need to show up at all, much less at a specific time, like employees do. I will say it is a complicated situation. This is complicated. And I will say that I feel like ride sharing, like I said in a few videos, I feel like it's in this unique category that I'm calling independent contractor with benefits. Because it is a tricky thing. I don't think I've ever seen any industry where most industries, you're like, okay, they're definitely an independent contractor or they're definitely an employee. Ride sharing is always the exception because I think we still don't know. It is still vague. It's a very tricky gray area, right? And going down here, they warn that a ruling requiring the companies to treat the state's 55,000, a lot of people, 55,000 Uber drivers and 35,000 Lyft drivers as employees. So let's round that to 90,000. Let's just round it up. About 100-ish thousand drivers. It could force them to cut or halt operations in Massachusetts. This is kind of annoying. This is the holy grail, the saving grace, the Hail Mary Uber and Lyft uses every time. When they get a ruling that they don't like, they're like, all right, let's just go home. Or we're going to leave, whatever. They're doing this in Minneapolis. They've done this in every area. I'm still waiting for a state or a city or an area in general to kind of stick to their guns and be like, hey, you say you're going to leave? Fine, do it. Now I know. This did happen in Austin, Texas in 2016, but the ride-sharing world was very different then what it is now. Now it's an integrated part of our society. If Uber and Lyft went away in an area, it would be a huge shock. Whether you're going to the airport, you're going to the bar, you're using it to get groceries, you're handicapped or disabled, and you use it to get around, I mean, it would be a huge shock. Not only to the people taking it, but the drivers as well. This would be close to maybe 100,000 drivers or people out of work if Uber and Lyft left Massachusetts. So I'm waiting, though, I hate to say it, for a city or area or state or whatever to stick to their guns and do this. Because Uber and Lyft always says this. Would they actually leave Massachusetts if this got put forward? Tough to say, right? And skipping down to the end of the article, this huge, important last line. By not classifying their Massachusetts drivers as employees, Uber and Lyft has avoided paying about $270 million into workers' compensation, unemployment insurance, and paid family medical leave over 10 years, according to a report, like I said earlier, by the state auditor. Things are getting very heated. I'm very invested in this story and the Minneapolis story, mainly because I feel like for the first time ever, and let me know what you think in the comments if you agree or disagree with this, but I feel like for the first time ever, states, legislation, people, lawmakers, cities, areas are now realizing, wow, all these rideshare drivers, all these Lyft and Uber drivers, they're not being treated well. They are being taken advantage of. And here's a big global picture too. And I think this is why this particular story is getting pretty big, is they're not just being taken, the drivers are not just being taken advantage of, as we all know. Every driver knows this, but the state as well. And all these organizations they have in terms of things like unemployment or paid sick leave, all these, if I'd call them institutions about being an employee, the state is being taken advantage of Uber and Lyft not paying the state what you get for certain things, right? So this is a huge situation that I think that's now getting the attention it deserves. Because I want to stress, like I said in so many videos, and I know I'm going to sound like a broken record, it is tough when I cover these articles where I do like to be very honest and I don't like to be negative in my videos, right? In most of my YouTube videos, I like to be positive, maybe talking about ways to make more money as a driver, talking about the benefits, but it's tough for me to be both positive and also honest because in these situations, I think it's now shedding light on everything that every driver has known for years. Drivers are not being treated fairly. And like I said, there are so many pros to being an Uber driver and a Lyft driver. There's a lot of benefits. I've talked to numerous people that said that being a rideshare driver has changed their life. It changed mine. I know it sounds cheesy, but it is true, right? And everybody has their different story or situation. But if you think about it, like we touched upon earlier when it comes to flexibility, the fact that, let's say, if you're trying to, get out of debt, if you need more working hours, if you want to find a job that has a very low barrier to entry, if you want to do something that allows you to go to your kid's dance recital or your kid's soccer game, if you want, let's say, just a secondary job in general to save up for a vacation, Uber and Lyft and ride sharing in general is perfect for that. In addition, there's no denying it here. It has added tons of new jobs into our economy, right? Like you saw here, between 90,000 and 100,000. I know I'm rounding up a good amount. Might as well round down. But about 90,000 rideshare drivers exist in Massachusetts. That's 90,000 new jobs that were created by Uber and Lyft. Amazing. There's no denying the positivity of ride sharing. But there's also a whole negative aspect. There's a whole dark side. And I think for a long time, people look too much at the positives of being a rideshare driver without the negatives. A lot of people, when it comes to Uber and Lyft, will just pull up their phone, they order an Uber or Lyft. They don't really ever think of if they're being treated fairly or poorly or good or bad. They just order it. And I think now for the first time, like I said, I think people and legislation and lawmakers and the general public is realizing like, wow, Uber and Lyft is really not treating their drivers well. Uber and Lyft is potentially misclassifying their drivers. And as a result of this misclassification, they're able to skate away by not spending that much money and treating their drivers worse. Whether it is not paying them that well, whether it's taking out a bigger cut, whether it's turning a blind eye to expenses increasing and them not really caring about that when it comes to their drivers, whether it is wrongful deactivations. I mean, the list can go on and on and on and on. Huge issues, right? Of course, huge issues. And I am very curious, of course, to see what happens with the situation. I think another big thing that got brought up, and I've talked about this here and there, is the idea of being an employee with being flexible. There was a company I worked for in Boston for a period of time, and I want to bring this up for this video. This is important because it was in Boston. It was in Massachusetts. And I'll say the name. It was called Favor. It's called Favor. It didn't work out, I think. I think they're from Texas. It didn't really pop off. But the idea was, it was kind of like GoPuff, if anyone's ever used it, where like basically you could do favors. So it was a combination of like Uber Eats or delivery driving plus like other stuff. So I could pull up Favor and say, hey, can you bring me a pack of pencils and a TV? And the person would be like, yeah, okay, I got you. So you're kind of like just a shopper, I think is probably the best way to word it, right? And here's the crazy thing. Working for Favor, I remember I was classified as an employee and I had a flexible schedule. So part of me feels like that, let's say if something did get put forward, and again, I don't know, I'm not stressed, I don't know, would, let's say if drivers did get classified as employees in Massachusetts, would they not be able to have that flexible schedule? Well, in my mind, if Favor could make it work, why not Uber and Lyft? I don't know if those two things are mutually exclusive. It is tough to say, right? Because obviously it is a gray area, like I said earlier, right? I can see both arguments on each side. I know a lot of drivers as well want to stay as independent contractors. They don't want to be employees. And back in the day, I'll be honest, for me, I used to want to be an employee, and I think drivers should be employees. I have changed my stance. I do think drivers should be independent contractors, but I do think they should get protection, which typically, when you're an independent contractor, you don't get any protection. This is also a big reason. I just did a video recently about the 5 reasons why I will never be an Uber driver and a Lyft driver ever again. That was the first reason. I call it status confusion, that we don't know, are you an independent contractor or an employee? It's kind of confusing, and this confusion causes a lot of messed up stuff to happen. And even still, even when there's no confusion, like say what happened here in California, when they become pretty pigeonholed as independent contractors, Uber and Lyft still continues to take advantage because they're like, hey, you said you want to be an independent contractor. We don't have to give you this, or this. We don't have to give you these benefits that typically you would get, right? It's a whole mess. And I think what's tricky about ride sharing is, like I said, it is its own category. Like I've said, independent contractor with benefits. I think for most drivers, they do want to be an independent contractor and they want to have the perks. There's pros and cons on both sides. But you want to have the perks of being an independent contractor. But also, with the way rideshare drivers are treated and with the way the working schedule is like, it does teeter a lot on being an actual employee, which means drivers should get employee benefits. They should get protection, paid sick leave, right? All these things that this article is talking about. But the fact that they're now being brought to trial, and this is now a legal thing, I think also too, I mean, granted, it could be a money grab, which I think some people have commented on this channel about that. Very, very true, right? Where it's not just people being like, oh, they're being treated unfairly. The state is now realizing, oh, wow, they owe us a lot of money. Yeah, the drivers should be treated fairly, but they owe Massachusetts, they owe us a lot of money. And so I think if anything now, I guess maybe a blessing in disguise if you look at it. The fact that now some states are realizing they're getting screwed over financially by this misclassification, I think now says, oh, wait. Before, whatever, the drivers, hopefully they do well. But now it's affecting me. Now it's affecting the state. Now it's affecting our bottom line. Now it's affecting the fact that, or it's demonstrating the fact that we should be getting all this money. Now we're really invested. We're hundreds of millions of dollars invested now in this story. So I just think, like I said, that the big things about this, I think that are positives, is whether or not this works out well in drivers' favors or not. Whether it works out well in Uber and Lyft's favor or not, I just think that now in general, the fact that this is now being brought to light in places like Minneapolis, California, New York, Massachusetts, the fact that this misclassification issue or treating their drivers fairly issue is being brought to light more and more and more. We are seeing articles like this more and more. It's just huge. It's huge to move things on the right direction because I feel like, if I had to say this, I feel like in the past few years, I don't know, I guess the pandemic's a little tricky to bring that into this equation, but I do kind of feel like we've been in almost the dark era, or the rock bottom, to use that SpongeBob analogy, I guess, or SpongeBob episode, which is a weird one, but I think right now we're almost in like the dark ages of Uber and Lyft. And I remember thinking like, okay, there's been a lot of really bad stuff happening with drivers. At some point, things have to get better, right? It's not going to continue to get worse and worse. I feel like at some point there has to be a turning point, right? I hate to use this analogy because it's kind of cheesy, but there has to be like a light at the end of the tunnel for drivers to be treated the way they should be getting treated. And I feel like now for the first time, we're kind of there. I think now for the first time, with all this, I guess use that analogy again, light being shed on these situations that drivers have been screaming about and talking about for years, now they're finally getting the justice they deserve, which is going to be huge for the future.